From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. On this podcast, I invite local leaders to share personal stories that others can learn from, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And those, by the way, are the exact words that I use in my pre-interview survey when I'm asking people to join us. That didn't scare away my guest today, Signe Friedrichs. As the longtime executive director of Herndon Arts in Fairfax County, Virginia through 2017, she was a driving force behind the opening of a new arts center there. And in 2016, she was elected to the Herndon Town Council and re-elected in 2018 and 20. Among her other volunteer positions, she's the president of the Rotary Club of Herndon-Reston. But she didn't come here to talk about any of that. She wants to talk about losing her race for re-election in 2022, and that is exactly the kind of courageous conversation that we expect and admire of Community Catalysts. Signe Friedrichs, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we get to the reason that you're here, I want to ask you to share with our audience the reason that you're in leadership in the first place. And really, it's the reason that you're on the planet in the first place. And I'm talking, of course, about your mother. And let me just note, this episode is going to air 2 days after Mother's Day. Tell us about your mom.
So my mom and also my grandmothers, all of them, were really strong-willed people who had a strong sense of how the world should be, and that it wasn't going to be that way, and they needed to keep working to make it that way. So my mom, who passed away maybe 4 or 5 months ago, she shaped so many things about my approach to the world. Yeah. When my mom was younger than I am now, she had a hemorrhagic stroke, which is when a blood vessel in your brain bursts. She became, the doctors told us she would never walk again. She would never be able to see out of one of her eyes. They told us all these things. And honestly, my mom just couldn't accept any of that. And she started doing things that really she shouldn't have been able to do. And she was completely unrealistic, which made it very hard for everybody who loved her, because we wanted her to look at her situation and say, okay, these are the things I can do. But she didn't. She said, I want to do this. And, so we were all scrambling around trying to make this, whatever it was, happen. And it was always something that you were just like, really, Mom? Really? But, the hardest thing for her being disabled was not being able to physically do things that she wanted to do. I mean, when she had her stroke, she was helping my brother. Well, she was actually redoing my brother's home. She was knocking down walls and putting up other walls. So that's the kind of person she was, and just very hands-on, very sort of, okay, this is what we need to do.
You described her as having, you said, because of her incredible tenacity, passion for doing good, and being useful.
Yes, exactly. That was exactly what she wanted to do. She, after she had that stroke, and when she could still not walk very well, and she never really got back to walking very well, but she ran for select board, which in Massachusetts is the same thing as town council. She served many terms. I don't know how many, but it was a lot. I mean, she lived about 25 years after the stroke. So she had a long life after the stroke as well. And at her memorial service, the town manager told me that one day it was icy out, and he saw that she had driven up to the town hall to attend the meeting. And he discovered her lying on the ground next to her car because she had slipped. So he picked her up, and she just went into that town hall and did the meeting. He said, if it would have been me, I would have gone home and rested. But my mother was just like, no, this is interesting. And lying in my bed is not interesting. So yeah, leadership is really about tenacity.
I want to switch the focus, Signe, from your mom to you. And I know that you had a long, thriving career as an arts executive. before you ran for town council. What made you decide to pursue public office in the first place?
Well, I was somewhat naive, which is kind of ironic given all the things I've told you, but I thought that I would be able to have more effect. I wanted to make sure that Arts Center got built. And honestly, it hasn't gotten built yet. It's still in the process and very early in the process. And it's so annoying. But anyway, I wanted to do my best to make sure that the arts community had a location that they could do things, because you think of teaching people about STEM and all those other things, but without a creative mind, without support for creativity, it's very hard to develop those problem solving skills just with STEM.
So take us back to 2016 or before, whenever it was in advance that you actually made the decision to run for the first time. Was that it? Was it you wanted to be a more effective arts leader for the community, or was there even something greater than that?
You put that really, really well. I like that. Yes, I did want to be a more effective arts leader, and I thought that this would be a good way for me to do it. As it turned out, I ended up having to step down from my role as executive director because there was a conflict of interest between me wanting funding for the arts and me being an employee of the arts. So that was, I didn't really expect that, but it made sense. The reason that I was able to run for office was because it was the turning. I don't know if you remember, 2016 was like the year of the woman. We thought it was going to be the time when women candidates were all going to get elected. This is why it was the worst night of my life, because I got elected, but Hillary did not. Anyway, I had a number of friends who were running for office and some who were already in office, and a lot of them cared about the arts. And so that's how I knew them. And they were looking for someone to fill out a slate so that people could just go down and know that we were all Dems and that they could elect all Dems. And that most of us were women, although my name was challenging because Signe isn't really a name most people know.
And it's Signe, right?
Right. And everybody's like, Mr. Friedrichs? No, that's my... But anyway, I had the support of all of the local elected officials. And that's how I got elected, because they helped me. And I think that's how anybody gets elected. If somebody says to you, we could use you, you'd be really helpful. I don't know if you'd be interested. And you think to yourself, oh, that would be so nice. I would be a leader. And then you become a leader in that field and you discover how full of pitfalls and spiders and, meteorites it is.
I'm going to come back. I'm going to ask you about those spiders and meteorites, but I want to make sure that I understand your mindset before the election of 2006. How far in advance of the election did you actually decide to run? A year or less or more?
It was at least a year, I think.
Okay. And so you were going into it, you were invited into it, you were part of a slate of candidates, you thought there's a rising tide of womanhood and women leadership, and this is going to be great. And you got elected.
And I got elected, yeah.
Despite anything else that might have been going on in the world, right? You must have felt pretty good that you got elected.
I did. Because I was the most unknown person on the list, I came in last in terms of the slate. So everybody got higher numbers of votes than I did. I got enough votes, but the next vote getter was a former council member, and she was mad that she didn't get elected. So she took me to court. So I spent about a month and a half after the election in limbo, trying to find a lawyer who would help me out for not too much money. And I absolutely did not see that coming. And, that was really an unpleasant period of time.
Right. And let's set the stage here. I looked up town of Herndon is about 25,000 population. Is that right?
I think it's 27,000 and it's about 4.2 square miles, something like that.
And do you remember how many votes you secured in 2016 to get elected in the first place? It's not a huge number of votes,
really.
Right?
No, but not that many people vote. They'll vote for the president. They might vote for Congress. And then they look at the rest and they go, I don't know.
I didn't look up your 2016 election, but I think that, winning vote getters, had 4 or 5,000 votes was enough to get them elected. So it's not huge numbers that you're talking about here.
No, to be fair, of those 27,000 people, a lot of them are not citizens because we have a very high proportion of immigrant population that hasn't quite gotten through all those processes yet. So, I'd go door to door and I'd say, vote for me. And they'd say, well, I can't vote. So,
right. You have residents who are not citizens, residents who can't vote in the election. I want to ask you a two-part question. I want to ask you how all of your experience in nonprofit leadership, give me one example of how it did prepare you and one example of how it didn't prepare you for being an elected leader for your town.
So it prepared me because when you're a nonprofit leader, you spend a lot of time interacting with businesses and government leaders. And you do that because you're trying to raise money and support for your mission. And I've never met, and I hope I never do meet, a nonprofit leader who is not rabidly trying to make their mission happen. You spend, so much time saying, this is great. This is going to make everybody's life better. Please help me with this. So that is great. That is really incredibly helpful. And that's how I met some of the people who invited me to join them on the slate, because the mayor of the town said, our congressman, our senator, why don't you join us?
Tell me something about being in nonprofit leadership that did not prepare you or didn't prepare you well for being an elected leader.
As a nonprofit leader, I did not really report to anyone else. I had a board of directors, but they saw me as kind of the person who came to them and asked for help, not as someone that they were in any way competing with. They just wanted me to be successful, and they wanted my mission to be successful. So, there weren't that many reporting things. There weren't that many legal things that I had to worry about. Being an elected official, the legal barriers in your way of getting anything done are so frustrating. You say, okay, well, this is obviously wrong. We've got to fix this. And you go to the town attorney, and the town attorney goes, well, because we're a state that, the General Assembly has to give us the power if we want to do this. And they haven't given us the power, so we could do a bill, but then you have to do that, 2 years in advance. So we have to talk to all it's just amazing how we've set up our government to slow us down. And I'm not someone who's like a small government or bust person, but it's really extreme right now.
Signe, are you saying that as a nonprofit leader, the virtue is your collaborative creativity and your ability to work with different people and different partnerships to make things happen, right? Where in nonprofit, you're continually trying to figure out how to use your scarce resources with other people's scarce resources to get things done. And are you saying that in town administration, town governance, that doesn't really work?
I to some extent, yeah, it's much harder. I don't know if that's particularly true of the smaller, like the municipal governments, but I think it is because we have such a tight budget. So, in a nonprofit world, you're thinking, these people have all this money. Why aren't they giving it to me? I could do so much with it. In municipal leadership, you're saying, well, we have, $38 million to work with. And they're like, well, everything's allocated except $20,000. What would you like to do with that $20,000? And you think, okay, well, we should really allocate more money to this, but we can't raise taxes because we have a tax that's a surcharge on a Fairfax County tax, which is then, we just have so many taxes in Herndon itself because that we have no other way of raising money, right? So anytime we do anything at all that's different, it is really very problematic for the staff and for the residents. So they say they want these things, and then you say, okay, well, do you want us to get rid of sewer? We could get rid of sewer. Do you want us to stop collecting your trash? Or we could spend less on sewer, but then you'd have to be more careful with it. Are you prepared to do that? there's just, yeah. So, I had the tools, and I had the staff was amazing. I mean, they would give you a little lesson in governance every day. But I think right now, and I forget where we started off on this, but I think right now elected officials are coming from walks of life which are more diverse, and so we can be more representative, but we don't have that background that when people were all lawyers and accountants that were in government. They kind of knew how that worked because they had either set it up or been working with it for a while. So
it's kind of the design of town council government that the policymakers are supposed to be amateurs, right? We elect people from the community. We hire staff to be expert at things and to make sure the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and the responsibilities are fulfilled, because no one is in favor of not having clean water brought to your house, or having the trash hauled away, or having the roads fixed, right? So we understand that. But what I think I'm hearing you say is, as a newly elected council member, you pretty quickly discovered that it's frustrating to try to influence town governance, even from the council.
Yeah, and people don't recognize that. And I would say with anyone who's running for office for the first time, when you hear them tell you what they want to do, take that with a grain of salt, because they don't know what they can do. They think they know what they can do because they're looking at the government and saying, the government should be doing this. Therefore, it's possible. Therefore, I'm going to make it happen, even though nobody's ever made it happen before. And I think it's good that people come into it with that sense of energy and problem solving. But I think it's also really important that you know what your job really is. And I think a lot of people in government, elected people in government, don't know what their job really is and are resistant.
Signe, what would you tell a new council member, whether it's in Herndon or anyone else? What would you tell them that their job actually is?
I would tell them, first of all, that their job is to ask questions that their constituents want to know the answer to. So if you're in a meeting and the staff says, we're going to do this because, we need to solve this problem, you have to say to them, how will this benefit our population? What are the benefits and the negatives? What are the costs? Are these costs sustainable? Are we legally allowed to do this? And usually the staff will never present anything to you that you can't do. But at the same time, your job as an elected official is to represent the needs of the people. So if the people say to you, we want an arts center, or we don't want an arts center, don't let that arts center be built. You have to figure out a way to work with the laws and to work with the staff to get those things accomplished. And sometimes they take a really long time, and you have to let your constituents know that, because they never expect it to take as much time as it does.
Are you putting your finger on this point that when we campaign for office, we talk about wedge issues, we try to appeal to specific constituencies that we hope will turn out to vote for us on election day, but that once you swear the oath of office, you have a responsibility to the breadth of your community, and that's somehow different than just trying to serve the interests of the people who got you elected?
I am saying that, but what I'm also saying is, and I had a big, long discussion with some former elected officials yesterday about this very question. Once you're elected, you're in governance. You're not in advocacy. You're still in advocacy to some extent, but you're not an agitator. And that is lost on a lot of people now. Once you get in there, you're not supposed to be running for office every single time you do something. You're not supposed to be turning it into some sort of partisan event that you can then say, well, I did this better than those other people, therefore you're going to reelect me. And you shouldn't be doing that the entire term. And what we're seeing now in local government at the municipal and county level is that people never stop running for office. They're constantly, it's become like Washington. And it's all about money It's all about power, even though the stakes are very, very low. I think I forget who said this, but the lower the stakes are, the kind of the idea is the meaner people are to each other to get to fight over that thing. So what we see now is that people are not trying to solve problems so much as they are trying to highlight problems and talk about what they would do, but that they're being forced not to do it by other people because those other people don't care about you. It's exhausting.
I hear what you just said, that people should not use this position to be agitators. Flip it around for me. What should they use the position to?
They should be collegial. They should see it as, okay, if you have an effective mayor or whoever the center is of your elected official group, they should be talking to you about what your goals are, what your constituents have told you your goals should be. They should be figuring out a way to help you achieve those goals or to educate you about how it can't be done this way, but maybe we do it some other way. So you need a unifying leader of the leaders, somebody that people either like or respect or both, who knows what they're doing. Then you need to trust your staff. If you don't trust your staff, then you need to get new staff, because it's not fair to them and it's not fair to your constituents if you're constantly fighting your staff and telling them that they're wrong because you think you know better than they do. Maybe you do, but usually you don't.
Signe, there's a word that you didn't use, but I want to come back and ask you to reflect on it. In the nonprofit sector, we use the word stewardship when we talk about philanthropy. We talk about, we ask people to donate their money so we can be stewards of their intentions, right? We can help make happen the things that our donors care to make happen, and we're the instruments by which that happens. What I think I'm also hearing you say is that approaching town council with the understanding that elected officials are stewards for their community, that regardless of their own personal beliefs or who got elected, who turned out to get them elected, that they are accountable and responsible to making the best long-term decisions for the town based on the resources and the situation that exists at the moment when they have to make those decisions. Does that stewardship ring a bell for you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we would always say, particularly in public, is, we are being careful with your dollars, right? You paid your dollars to us to make sure that we're running things in a way that's healthy and that takes care of our basic needs. The other thing is, you're talking about how somebody will be elected because one particular constituency care about one particular constituency, and then they have to expand it. That's no longer happening, I will tell you. It's very tribal right now. So I had a number of different council members on the last council say, well, my constituents don't care about that. And I'd say, we're elected to represent the entire town, not just whoever your constituents are, your personal constituents. And the implication was that those people were only representing the people of their religion or ethnicity or whatever it was. And there were lots of different, I'm not putting it on anyone in particular, but they were the newer council members. And I think that there's a lack of willingness to understand that aspect of it. I don't get it. And I think that's really going to ruin government if we don't get past that.
So after 6 years on the town council, you lost your reelection.
Mm-hmm.
What happened, and what about that do you want to talk about? What's the part that we should learn from that part of the experience?
I tend to ramble on and not really give you the overarching structure. So I'll say that during the election, I had a family with a lot of health issues, so I wasn't able to canvass the way I usually did. But at any rate, I annoyed somebody on town council beyond belief who had been a friend of mine, had been a supporter. And he decided that I shouldn't be reelected. And I know that because he created false slates for the Democratic Party, which had said that they were not going to intervene in our election this time because they were really tired of how we were bringing each other down. You're not supposed to use the logo or the name, the Democratic Party, or all that kind of stuff on a slate. You're also not supposed to use blue paper. I didn't realize this before I was running for office, but every political organization has its own color that they're supposed to use. This person who didn't like me decided that he would really rather have somebody that he disagreed with even more than he disagrees with me on council because he didn't like me. And that turned into all kinds of weird, people would come back to me and say, they'd give me a big hug and say, I wanted to vote for you, but they told me I'm not allowed to. Or I wanted to vote for you, but they said you're a Republican. So it just got really ugly.
That sounds like an interesting difference between the nonprofit sector and town governance as well. If collaboration and partnerships is built into nonprofit management, those are longer-term relationships. You're talking more about a transactional kind of relationship among people in governance.
It's a transactional relationship that you don't realize is transactional, when it's happening. You think you're friends. And these are people I knew from the nonprofit days. But I will say, nonprofit world is not Pollyanna. There are still alliances and people cutting each other off and stuff like that. But, and you always think that you're right. That's the problem. You think you're right, and the other person thinks they're right. And yes. If you don't talk, which is what can happen when you're a very strong egoed, strong-willed person. If you don't talk about it, it just festers. So yeah, here's my best piece of advice. When you discover that you've done something to offend somebody else, or they've done something to offend you, but you need to work with them, don't just go off in a huff and never talk again and only talk in public and undercut each other. Go ahead and talk. That's really important. And don't elect somebody to office who's not willing to talk and their ego is so big that they're not willing to put it aside. Because we all have big egos. Otherwise, we wouldn't put ourselves forward like this. But at the same time, you have to be willing to humble yourself. You're arrogant most of the time because you have to be pushy to get things done. But when you discover that you've got pushed too hard and you've gone too far, you really need to step up. And that was a lesson I learned too late. Honestly, I could have learned that earlier.
For anyone listening who might be considering making the leap and running for public office, what's the most important thing to know about what they are about to get themselves into?
I'm glad you asked me that. Communication. Communication is the most important thing. Communicating with people you don't like, communicating with people who have annoyed you, communicating with your constituents, communicating with your staff, and working collaboratively. That's really the only way to get it done.
Signe Friedrichs, thank you for being open to this conversation today. It was really great to speak with you. I neglected to mention right up front, you and I met a couple of years ago at the Virginia Municipal League conference. You were a panelist and I got to facilitate a conversation. It was great to meet you then, but really wonderful to sit down and have a conversation with you today and really get to know you. And I wish you well in wherever your leadership journey takes you. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Again, my sincere thanks and appreciation to former council member and forever community catalyst Signe Friedrichs from Herndon, Virginia. This episode was produced by Kerry Lengel and edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Jenna Maisel is our production assistant. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, comment, or story to share, reach me at 602-688-2724 or podcast at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.